Sure. Hello. Thank you, Wilma, and welcome to PRCA Secrets of My Success. I'm Tom Watt. I'm the co-chair of the PRCA in Scotland. And today, as Wilma mentioned, we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Luke Skipper. Luke is the Chief Communications Officer for Aston Martin Aramco Formula One, probably one of the most James Bond job titles I think that we've had in the series. And certainly, Luke, your background, that's a real background, and you're in Monaco. So, yes, very, very cool. Luke has had a fascinating career in comms so far, working across some genuinely historic political campaigns, working in public affairs consultancy, and now as an occasional extra in Drive to Survive on Netflix, I believe. It's my pleasure to introduce Luke Skipper.
Thanks, Tom. Really happy to be here.
So this series is all about hearing directly from some of the best and most experienced communications professionals in the country. So please, if anybody has any questions at any point, just drop them in the chat, and we'll ask Luke as we go. I guess sort of potted CV to start with. Luke, give us a bit of background on your CV and what's led you to Aston Martin and F1.
Yeah, sure, Tom. So I'm originally born and raised in Canada. Did a university exchange program in Edinburgh University. I really, really enjoyed it. I returned to do a master's degree in political studies at Edinburgh University. And that's when I started my career in earnest in the UK. Started as an intern for the Scottish National Party. And then that became a part-time researching role. And then I did some time in Brussels as well as an internship at the European Parliament, which was quite interesting. And then I started as a junior researcher in the House of Commons with the SNP Westminster Group. And that's when I really kind of started on in terms of comms journey. Yeah, I was with the party from before they'd ever won anything in terms of an outright election, all the way to the 2015 landslide, which saw them win all but 3 seats in Scotland. So that was the kind of political stage of my career. And then I joined Weber Shandwick alongside good people like yourself. And I got into the consulting side of things, but it was more advocacy and lobbying than it was comms in the beginning. And then that developed into more of a well-rounded corporate comms, crisis comms, and advocacy role there. So I worked there for another 6 or 7 years, clients ranging from energy to housing to construction to retail. So it was a real broad mix. And then I was brought in to help Weber Shandwick with some motorsports things, and then that kind of led me to joining the FIA, where I served for 2 years as the director of communications, and then I've recently joined Aston in January this year as a chief comms officer. So that's kind of the potted tour.
I mean, we probably need to get this question out of the way first. What does a typical day, week look like for you?
Yeah, it's really, really dynamic. And as you'd expect, fast. We're in the business of speed, and everything happens very, very quickly. So you're in a very interesting environment in which you travel around the world into 24 different cities with all of the journalists that cover your sport, with your team, with the senior leadership. And you're effectively in a bubble in which nothing remains, and nothing remains secret for long. So, you are in a competitive environment as well. So you're having to deal with, different teams doing different things and seeking an advantage in any way that they can within the rules. So that makes it really, really interesting. So an average day for us is, well, it varies quite a bit, but we have, the weekend tends to run the same way. So tomorrow we'll have media day. So we'll have a reception for journalists. They'll be able to come in and ask questions of the team principal on the record. Then the drivers will have mandatory interviews that they have to do in the written and the TV pens, for example. We then have a very special member of the team coming from the factory, and they'll be shadowed by Netflix. And then in the evening, we're hosting a dinner on our yacht with some journalists, and then we're having a reception for them. So, yeah, that's a day. That's a run plan of a day where nothing's happened, and of course things will happen, and the plan has to change quickly. So it's really could be quite chaotic, and it's very results driven. So last week we had a good performance in qualifying, and we immediately had to do 5 interviews, TV interviews within about 20 minutes on the back of the garage. So those are the things that you have to react to and have to make sure that you can get organized very, very quickly. And then I guess the rest of the time, it's more strategic comms planning, whether it's launching partner comms, we have new sponsors come on board, or profiling certain individuals in the team and sort of more business related media. So the real challenge is trying to manage both, right? So you're when you're on the road, you're really focused on what's happening trackside, as we say. And then it's trying to find the time to make sure that the other bits are going the way that they need to be, and the profile of the team is being raised or defended or promoted in the right way. So that's the real challenge. But everyone works really, really, really hard. We're all in different time zones, so everyone has to be really adaptive. And you are on pretty much 24/7. But the good thing is we have mandatory shutdowns where you're not allowed to work. And if you didn't have that, people would be definitely having a lot more burnout. So August is a month that we get pretty much all of it off.
So you kind of mentioned the travel. One thing we probably should mention, where are you at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm in our hospitality unit, which is just driven from Imola. Yeah, so we're right on the edge of the harbor. So often the guests will come in on the tender and they can go to the paddock club that's over there. The pit lane's just there. So Monaco is obviously an iconic, probably the most iconic, but it's also very, very tight, very, very tight. So the motorhomes are hanging off the edge of the docks and things like that. So it's quite the squeeze to get everyone in here.
Going back to the start of your career, and you mentioned that you come across from Canada and you were in Edinburgh. What was it that made you think I want to get into comms?
Yeah, I think the internship that I had was really transformative for me because I was kind of given free rein to do research within the portfolio, which was education at the time. And I discovered a data set that showed that the Scottish government was really underperforming when it came to PE, physical education time, compared to other European countries. I know it sounds very, very dry, but I presented the research to the MSP, and they were really excited by it. And then it ended up, being the front page of the Glasgow Herald. And to have that happen when you're, just starting your career was a real buzz. I think it kind of opened my eyes to the role that communications, plays within organizations, and the importance of, in particular in politics, in terms of messaging, and getting that message out and saying it in the best way possible. So yeah, that was kind of a bit of a eureka moment for me about, this is exciting. And then I developed my comms skills really through the prism of politics, which is a particular set of comms for sure. It's again quite fast. It needs to be succinct. Everything that politicians say is rightly scrutinized. So, it's a very detailed driven thing. So yeah, that was really interesting to learn kind of comms through that. And then when going into consulting, okay, well, what do businesses want? How do businesses want to communicate? And it gave me a nice kind of varied background in comms, but I've always enjoyed that, knowing what might be in the news before anyone else, or help shaping the reaction to things. For me, that was really exciting, and still is.
Was there any particular kind of mentors that you had, or any particular people that you want to call out that were influential in kind of, shaping that early comms journey that you had when you were discovering how you land a couple of key messages in your society?
Yeah, I've been really, really blessed with that. I've had the opportunity to work with some of the best politicians, in my view, in this generation in the UK. So, the likes of, Nicola Sturgeon, but a lot really Angus Robertson, the current, the current um, culture secretary in the Scottish government. I mean, I worked very, very closely with him as his chief of staff for a long time, and it was really great to watch a professional who has a journalist background doing comms as an elected representative, and I learned a lot. And he really taught me the importance of kind of work-life balance and managing the stresses of a job, which is quite fast moving, but also making sure that you're getting the time at home and you're not neglecting that side of your life. So yeah, he was really, really good. And I've also had the opportunity to work with some really interesting people in motorsports and the mobility side. It's I guess as you kind of progress through your career, if you want to keep going, a lot of times it involves management, and you do less but you manage more, and it's been really interesting to see these leaders and how they approach management. And in Formula One, you are talking to people who are genuinely the experts in their field, in terms of engineering and aerodynamics. But they only will make it there because they're good at managing people, and getting the most out of teams. And I think that I've been really lucky to be able to kind of shadow those people. And I guess the key thing is to be always watching and listening. Good leaders don't talk very much; they listen. And all of the best ones that I have would always seek opinions of others, when it comes to their decision making. So, that's probably the biggest thing that I've picked up from these people, is that they're really good listeners.
Hmm. Was it,
And they make people valued. They feel valued on the team because of that.
were there any particular pieces of advice that they gave, or is it more been just like watching and learning and absorbing from
Yeah,
people like that?
I think like certainly encouraging a culture of constructive challenge. So everyone from the most junior member of staff to the chief executive should feel empowered to say their opinion on things and be valued for that. That's definitely a really big lesson for me. Also, like, it sounds quite simple, but often if people don't appear to be performing well or are frustrated, it's because they haven't really been asked what they actually want to do. What do they want to achieve in their career? And there's usually flexibility within roles to make sure that people are, whether they're getting experience in managing projects or they're developing relationships with journalists. And I think for me, it's that kind of that feedback loop of listening and managing people that way, which is the best advice that I've had. And I speak personally, like, that's the bit I enjoy most about my job. Well, winning, and watching people develop professionally. That's a really rewarding aspect of the job as you kind of progress through your career.
But you came in through the internship, and you mentioned you were working with some really influential politicians that showed you the ropes, and working in Brussels as well. Is there any advice you would give to people looking to take that path? Like getting a front page headline is probably a good place to start.
Yeah. Well, the traditional path into politics is becoming involved, at a party level. A lot of parties have opportunities for young people to, whether it's, paid internships or volunteering, voraciously read the news. I would always, when I interviewed people, I'd ask them what was running on BBC, in the morning in politics. And if they didn't know, then I would be like, well, how much do you actually want this job? So, you have to consume all of that media. And really just through any career, but in particular, probably politics. It's about networking as well. it's about going out and be physically present and getting to know people, and they can kind of see how you work and what you do. And I think that's really important. And I think in politics, you never know where people are going to end up. So you develop those relationships, stay in touch with them, because like, it'll be surprising, and no one is, not worth talking to, like it's when you see that kind of approach to things, you're like, this person, it's not good. It's rude, but it's like everyone there in that kind of world of politics, it's, worth getting to know them, and especially not being tribal about it, because at the end of the day, there's not a heck of a lot that separates political parties in our kind of democracies, and everyone genuinely is there to try and make it better. But if you're tribal about it, it'll always be a point in politics where you're gonna have to work with someone else on the other side. So it's just being mature about that.
No one is not worth talking to. I think and if anyone takes anything from that, that's an excellent mantra for us all. So you've spent the time in politics. You've developed your skills there. Some really historical points. Then working in consultancy and where you are now. Are there any? What are the Is there a couple of things you are most proud of looking back on your career?
Yeah, I think the really exciting thing about politics is you're effectively, the vast majority of people in the country are a shareholder or a voter, and you have to convince them to lend you their vote and change the political representation that they have. And like the stopwatch, the voters don't lie. And I think it was, being part of campaign teams that developed messaging that cut through and motivated people to vote in, large numbers. That's hugely rewarding. And really in politics, I think sometimes people forget that if you don't win, you can't really do anything. And that bit is the hardest bit, but in order to make the changes that you want to, you have to win. So I think some of those historic campaigns were massive highlights for me. In consultancy, there's one in particular, where I won't name the client, but it was around the Grenfell tragedy, and we were working really, really, really hard to make sure that the legislation in Scotland, when it came to cladding, was the best, the safest it could be. And it was a surprisingly difficult campaign that was ultimately successful. So Scotland now has the safest, and I think advocacy and lobbying is often painted the wrong way about influence, and I think that was just a fantastic example of everyone working together to change something genuinely for the better. So I was really, really, really proud of that. And in terms of motor racing, let's see. Like, I mean, it's absolutely fantastic to be a part of a team that's all pulling together in the same direction. And when you were working for the regulator, it's you're effectively the referee, so no one wants to hear from the referee. But when you do well in quali or you get some points, there's a huge buzz about it, and it's completely addictive. In the morning you'll love it, in the afternoon you'll hate it because something's happened, and it's just, but everyone's on this kind of this crazy traveling circus / roller coaster together. So we'll see in motorsports, but yeah, I think personally, for me, where there's jobs where you can see the final output, in the sense that you've delivered a campaign, or you've won an election, or you've the team's done really, really well. I think that's kind of what I'm drawn to. I like to have that kind of immediacy with in terms of work versus results.
So I guess the flip side of that is, not, we wouldn't call them failures, learning opportunities. Is there any kind of key learning opportunities that you've had where things maybe haven't gone as expected, or you thought something was a good idea at the time that you think are really great to share? What kind of opportunities there were?
I think first of all, everyone's going to make loads of mistakes, right? And that's how you learn. It's about how you rebound and improve. That's the important thing. And I think for me in my career, there's been sometimes there's a tendency to prioritize speed over full accuracy and getting facts, because you're in a very fast-paced environment. So I always now make sure that I consult with my colleagues, my deputies and others about, okay, this is my gut reaction, what's yours? And that kind of process of having dialogue with your colleagues and feedback often kind of takes the pressure out of the moment in which you feel you need to act right away. Now, we're driven by events here, and you do have to react right away. But even if you just take that a little bit of time to have a discussion, to sense check things, I think, when I was younger in particular, there was always kind of like, let's get it out. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that I've learned as well. And I think too that took me a long time to realize that if you invest the time in people, within your team, is ultimately going to make your life much easier. And I think there's a tendency of some, and me, especially in the beginning of my career, to be like, oh, by the time I explained that and taught someone, I could just do it, and it's a total false economy. And I think that's what you can really develop great relationships with your colleagues, because you've taken the time. So I always say to people, they don't, maybe they don't know how to do this. I'm like, well, have we showed them? Have we explained, what we need and how we do it? So yeah, I think if you ever catch yourself being, mega stressed out as part of a team, is there an opportunity for you to kind of let others grow, but also make your life a little bit easier? And again, I think with age that, you tend to realize that a bit more.
So on the face of it, the world of politics and the world of consultancy and the world of motorsport, very, very different beasts. But I think one of the things you've kind of highlighted is winning. Winning is important. Winning gives you a sense of control over what comes next. Are there any other real similarities in in the kind of mentality that you've approached?
Yeah, there's lots.
Or the day to day.
There's lots, Tom, and there's actually quite a few people in the paddock with a similar career experience as me. And I think it's because, it's a very regulated technical sport that, while it has a cost cap, is, it's a large cost cap. So invariably there's politics, in the sport. And it's very competitive, just like politics. So there are some parallels as well. And I think often in politics, it's about taking really, really complex concepts and making them understandable to a voter. And motorsports is extremely complex, and it's about telling that kind of messaging to our fans and our audiences and our partners in a way that they can understand, and that is accessible, because you can really, really get lost in the detail here. And that isn't necessarily the type of communications that we want. We want to be open and transparent, and positive when we can, but not get sort of lost in the minutiae of technicality. And I think it's also that, it's just the pace and speed, so politics, on the front line of politics, it's, you're reacting to the news every day, and you're doing the exact same thing here. You're reacting to motorsports news, or you're trying to shape a narrative. So yeah, I find it quite similar.
Who would you say who are your key stakeholders for your comms? I mean, obviously, it's a team sport. There are fans of the sport. There are fans of the teams. There are fans of the drivers. There's a regulatory body. There's broader journalism.
It's
and
really,
obviously series like Netflix as well.
Yeah, it's really varied, and it's only increasing in terms of the variety of audiences and stakeholders. So the sport has seen an explosion in viewership, in particular amongst the 16 to 24-year-old demographic. Almost 50-50 gender split now, which 20 years ago would have been 10%. And those people, those new fans have different interests, right? So, we have stakeholders and partners, from AI to skincare to luxury to, and all of our community, we need to be getting our message into those spaces. It's not just about motorsports media. So, there's different audiences there, whether that's sport business or tech or lifestyle. And then we also obviously communicate directly to our fans. So social media has totally changed the game as well. So we communicate directly with them. We try and be the most inclusive, exclusive brand in motorsports. We want to see our fan base grow. We also do lots of cultural crossover stuff. So, we do music. We had Dom Dollar in, do a set for our fans in Miami. It's really, really changing. And then, of course, there's the day-to-day, motorsports press that asks the more technical questions, and they want a different level of detail. So yeah, it's really, really quite broad. And I think the most successful teams are the ones that understand that and are able to grow their business through very clever targeting about where they appear.
How do you balance that in terms of messaging? So on one hand, you've got people who are new to the sport who maybe come in through the documentaries that maybe not have that technical detail, but are eager to learn, and other people who have been fans for 20, 30 and want to know every single little detail, and that can be quite exclusionary.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's interesting if you watch the kind of how the platforms around motorsports have changed. So, there's been very traditional outlets that now do much more social led content. There's sites that were doing kind of more of the clickbait that are now trying to become more serious. So they're all trying to kind of find their way, and it's often the level of detail that is the difference. But there's a real appetite for behind the scenes content, and I often find that having a third party, whether that's an influencer or a technical expert, explain it, that's really valuable. So it's it's a third party that can come into the garage and explain tire warming to people who have no idea about tire warming, and it's that kind of authenticity as well. We need to reflect our fan base. And there's a lot of really, really great influencers out there, and people that are able to tell the technical story, but also tell the business side of the business story as well. So yeah, that's all really, really changing, but it's changing for the better for sure. Like, fans are on a journey, I think, and they are becoming more technically interested as the longer you watch, of course, the more you're going to be curious. But also, the sport's done a fantastic job at selling, the lifestyle, the place that we are now. So yeah, that's a very long way to say it's very mixed.
And I just want to say, if anyone does have any questions for Luke, do drop them in the chat, and we will we'll pose some listener questions, viewer questions shortly. I want to pick up on something you said about influencers and how social media has changed the game and given more opportunities for people to sort of speak directly to yourself, the brand, the drivers. But also, one of the first things you said is you got into comms through the front page on the Herald. How has the media landscape changed in your perception from the early days in your career to where it is now?
Yeah, it's something that you think about a lot. Putting out a press release, to a wire, to then communicating instantly on an Instagram post that will get far more pickup than a press release you've slaved over. That's all there. It's a real mix now, and I think that the media as a whole is not maybe struggling to define it, but it's in massive flux. If we're talking about how people consume information, news, everything seems to be getting shorter. You know what I mean? It's all everyone, and everyone's kind of battling, and in an increasingly small space for that kind of eyeballs. And I think for us, is, what are the different things that we can be doing? What are the interesting things that we can be doing? What are the kind of partners that people will say, oh, I didn't think that would make sense for motorsports, but when you look at it, you're like, absolutely, of course, these brands want to be there. That's the challenge, and I think being open about different ways of communicating it. So maybe this is an Instagram post. Maybe this is a sit down. The old, but I think, this is probably going to show my age. I still think there's a real huge importance on those personal relationships with members of the press and senior figures, and the importance of people hearing messages in the first person. So it's like having a proper interview, getting to that level of detail. I still think there's huge value in that. But equally, great social media posts will go very, very far, and have a positive impact. So yeah, it's a real balance.
And again, one of the things you touched on just at the start about work-life balance. How do you, and that, great that you've got like August downtime, but it looks very glamorous. It looks amazing being, in Imola and then in Monaco. How does one balance
Yeah,
the travel and having
it's a challenge for everyone in this industry, for sure. The good thing about it, though, is where you're going to be and when. So ideally, a lot of teams are moving towards trying to have resiliency and redundancy in the team, so that you don't have to do all of the events. There's a realization that 24 is very, very taxing. But also, if you want to take advantage of the places that you are, there's opportunities to go on holidays or make sure your family's involved. So yeah, but yeah, you've got to want to do it. And you've got to be very clear with the people who are getting into it, what it entails. You shouldn't sugarcoat it, because it is quite tough. But I think the sport will find, as it grows, that there needs to be more of a balance, and that will be discussed, whether that's in regulations or, it's they could be up to 25, but they say they're going to stick with 24. I would think that there'll be 24 for the foreseeable. So if that's the case, then what are some of the things that the industry can do to make sure that people are getting a bit of a better balance? And it's also performance, right? Like, by the end of the season, regardless of your task, you're going to be pretty exhausted. So, if you have to deliver performance, then how do we best do that? And I guess the other thing I say, Tom, is like, we're about 200 people out here, but there's 800 in the factory, so it's a huge amount of effort that goes into what we do. And I think people focus on the traveling bit because it's the bit that's on TV, but there's a whole army of people doing really, really hard work at the factory.
Some fantastic questions. Thank you so much for those that have added some questions. So we can take a few questions from our audience. If you were to start your career again tomorrow, what advice would you give yourself?
Everything is going to be okay. No, I would challenge myself to be curious about everything. Use every opportunity in the beginning of your career and throughout your career to learn about different things. Be curious about aspects of the business that you might not have a direct role in. I think that's so important in comms, that you're able to communicate authentically about whatever it is that you're doing. And the best way to do that is to kind of be a little bit nosy and try and figure out how different things work and have that kind of curiosity. That'd be my advice.
Sounds very, very solid advice. Another question from the audience. When letting a documentary series into film, what were the biggest concerns you had about letting them behind the curtain? Is there any kind of railings you had to put up around that?
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating challenge because all teams are dealing with issues that are, there's competitive advantage and therefore certain degree of secrecy, but that's balanced against being authentic and showing emotion, which is what people are there to see at the end of the day. So yeah, there are some guide rails that are kind of well established across the teams, but really the story comes alive when they have that kind of level of access. So it's something that different teams might have slightly different approaches to it, but I think it's generally recognized that they want to see the ups as much as they want to see the downs. So giving that kind of access is going to ultimately tell a more human and better story, I think.
How do you approach it as a kind of sports team, almost brand communication piece, or is there an element of we're in entertainment now, we're wanting to bring people with us? It's maybe less partisan than that. I don't know what
Yeah,
that's
I
the
think
right.
it's probably more the latter.
Hmm.
Uh, it's obviously got very, very wide reach and is important. But it is an opportunity for us to show what we're really like, and how collaborative we are and how hardworking we are and how passionate we are and obsessed we are with what we're doing. And that's ultimately the best kind of brand messaging because it's authentic. And these people all, we all want to go out there and win, right? So that's the kind of essence of the story that I think is the most important for us to get across.
Thank you so much for your questions, everybody. Please do keep them coming. They're excellent questions. On the kind of collaborative piece, how do you fit with how does you and the comms function work with the wider team, with the drivers, with the pit team? How does that work? How will that
Yeah,
work over the next 4 days?
yeah, it's obviously a big core part of the job. Um, if you can imagine it, like instead of in more traditional comms, you might have a spokesperson, that will give a line on something. You have drivers, senior engineers, senior leaders. So there's huge amount of effort goes into briefing, what's happening the week before the race. What is the key messaging, and then an equal amount of work goes into coordinating as quickly as you can to let others in that group know what other people have said. Right. So there could be someone in the TV pen saying, X choice led to this, and then you have to make sure the team principal knows that's what they said, and then can reinforce the message or be aligned. So yeah, that's and it's lots of WhatsApps and briefing meetings, and sharing information as quickly as you can. So we audio clip, the clip gets sent, gets shortened, the key messages are pulled out, and then every morning we go through what was, and what's in the press, and then so yeah, it's basically a never ending dance, and it's about sharing that information as quickly as you can, and you have to ultimately make decisions within short time frames. So it's really useful to have a more comprehensive kind of brief, that kind of evolves over the weekend and then is sent out again. So that's kind of the bare bones of it. But yeah, it's there's roving media, so anyone at any point could be asked a question by a journalist. So it's definitely a challenge to try and keep that kind of messaging the same. But it's also a very emotive sport. Like if these drivers are out there doing their utmost every race, and they're going to feel they're gonna feel emotional about that, and they're exhausted at the end of a race. So it's those kind of things that you kind of have to go, yeah, get that. I I don't know what it's like, but I'm sure it's exhausting and challenging. So yeah, you know.
Are there any quite useful for people to any advice you have for managing that? Like you're obviously working literally in a very fast-paced environment, but obviously the speed and the we'll call them vulnerability points, throughout from a messaging point of view. How much
Yeah,
do you,
I
how
think
much
it's
can you
just
bring?
like, if you can imagine, like there's very few sports where you're traveling at 300 kilometers an hour for over an hour, and then you get out and you have a camera stuck in your face. So, the one of the big things is to just try and give them a little bit of time to decompress, so and what no one realizes, and I didn't really realize until I'd start, but drivers only see their race, right? They're obviously highly focused on their race. So there's, explaining what happened in the race with others, and therefore what might have affected certain decisions that were made, that, and you only really have 5 minutes to do that before they get. So, yeah, it's not like TV where you're seeing everything. It's like, they're in the cockpit. That's all they see. And they get a bit of radio traffic. So it's kind of like taking the time to do that is really, really useful if you can. And so, yeah, that's that. And then they go into a debrief, so they have a full debrief of what's happened, and then they can give more in depth, but they always get nabbed for the post-race reaction.
How many of your team are on site on a race day typically?
Yeah, in the comms team, there'd be 3 to 5, depending on the event. That's some teams have more, some teams have less. Some teams organize, whether that's comms, marcom. So there's a lot of differences between teams, but generally speaking, you need people there to support the senior leaders and the drivers. And then often if there's like activations happening, the team will be bolstered on the partner side of things.
How does it? I mean, you can almost take this through on a race day, and obviously you've seen it from a regulatory perspective, where you'll have seen a sort of bird's eye view of how the teams interact on race day, even from their comms perspective. Like, how is there any degree of similarity of approaches between the different comms teams on the different teams? Or what's the relationship like between the different racing teams, comms teams of the day?
It's again, it's quite interesting. So, teams have regular communications that they put out. So, race, like, quotes after quali, for example, or the race results. Then there's interviews. They all have to do the same interviews. So there's a lot of communication between teams around, is this the right way to do this? You know what I mean? Like, or what is the expectation of these drivers' times, and what have you been? So they coordinate that way. So we try and make all of our lives easier. And we deconflict. So we try and not have briefing sessions at the same time. So everyone can do that. So yeah, there's a really close working there. And then at the end of the day, we're all in the same industry, and so we talk a lot about how we can make improvements or things that we might want to align on. But every team does do it slightly differently, right? So you're never going to get 100% agreement, but there's often issues where it's like, okay, this is a pre-race request for driver, all these drivers, we can't do it because of these reasons, and then that kind of communication happens.
How do you manage the relationships between? So you've got who are now like properly. You've got superstar drivers. You've got superstar drivers that obviously need time, space. But you mentioned that they needed a bit of time to decompress, obviously. But there must be sponsorship demands. There's media demands. You've got people like influencers who want. How do you manage the demands on sports people effectively? It's senior elite level sports people.
Yeah, when you see it now from the other side, you understand the kind of the level of demands on these athletes, and the support structures that they require around them, to make sure that whether from the physical side all the way through to the strategy and all of that. So yeah, and I think that there's basically ensuring that they have those kind of chunks of time that they require that are like sacrosanct, or is the best way to do it. So it's like on a weekend there's media day, let's do all the media, most of the media then, and then what the other things are. And of course, there's always requests to have one-to-ones and things like that. So we're we work very closely with their teams to ensure that if we are asking for those kind of things, that's the things that they want to do, and that's the, where we want to be, and be slightly selective that way, to ensure that we're not, that they are getting the kind of time and prep that they need to go out and perform.
What do you do in terms of like media training? Is that tailored to the different kind of needs of the stakeholders? Is that, to some
Well, we definitely
others?
we definitely do use it, and we have refreshers. We're as our business grows, like many other teams, we have lots of really interesting people that can tell interesting stories about, whether it's IT or engineering, or so, we make sure that they have that training. And both of our drivers are quite experienced, and they do have to do a lot on a weekend. So yeah, but the media training, there's a lot of kind of specialized sports media training that's also kind of blends a little bit of psychology as well. And there are some good experts that can kind of get people in the right mind frame to do this, because it's often, what is, like, this just happened on track, what's your opinion? It's not like there's a lot of prep time or briefing time. So it's about, have you listened to the question? Have you framed it the way that you want to? And it could be quite emotional and stressful, right? Because it's a sport. So, there's the balance between having that authenticity, but also, like, answering the question in a way that's the best. So yeah, I think that the kind of training, I always really enjoyed that side of the business, because, like, we would do committee prep, so people would be going in front of House of Commons committee, and it's that kind of, like, that kind of scenario planning, or like war gaming. It does have a lot of value, because you can simulate pretty closely what it is. And when we do our media training, like, it's immediate playback, or we can simulate, like, down the line interviews, so they get used to all the different kind of formats that they might be expected to do. So yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile thing.
It's fascinating. There's an element of this kind of sports psychology to almost make obviously hugely passionate people that are really driven, literally, metaphorically, in every way, at an elite level. But there's an element of, this is what they need. I need I don't know if a barrier is the right way of doing it, but like a process to follow to make sure that people are getting the right messaging and
Yeah, I think, like, overexposure or the wrong type of exposure can affect us all, right? Like, I mean, if you're operating at that kind of level, that there needs to be a lot of thought into, when it is, and why you're doing it. So yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting. And I have, like, just a huge amount of respect for athletes at this level, and the kind of demands placed upon them. It really is a lot.
I think we've probably got time for a couple more questions. Kind of two questions in one. What is it that continues to motivate you? You've taken part in some amazing things so far in your career, and you are still, you've still got a long career ahead of you. Where do you what's next? What do you aspire to?
Well, I come to work here and I learn tons every day. So I and that's, for me, so important in a job. I'm learning so much about it, and the people involved, the business, and the kind of passions. It's very infectious. So these people are really passionate about what they do at a very high level. So yeah, I definitely am enjoying that. And yeah, and in terms of the future, I think it's that kind of curiosity. The sport's never been in a better position. The way so much is changing, it's just a really exciting time to be here. And it's a huge opportunity, which I'm, really grateful.
So last audience question. anything in particular that you're looking forward to for next season? Also, maybe like, is there a particular track or city that you hold
Yeah,
dearest?
well, next year is going to be, it's a challenge for everyone. It's a completely new regulation set, so there'll be a lot of challenges around communications of that. So you're explaining to fans all of the new regulations, but it'll be an interesting challenge. Yeah, and in terms of tracks, I haven't been to all of them yet, so I can't say for sure. But yeah, Suzuka is pretty special in Japan. Super, figure eight, old school, lots of elevation changes, really tight. It's just one of those classic tracks. So yeah, and I always love going to Japan.
Is there is there are you do you notice marked differences? Obviously you're dealing with international media and very, very different in different parts of the world. Do you notice a marked difference in how the media interact with, yourself, with
Um, yeah,
the
there's
event,
I,
or
I think there's some cultural differences, but the there's accredited media which can go to every race. You have to go to a minimum number of races to get that accreditation. So the way that they approach it is quite similar, but sometimes you'll get national media there. And you just have to think in the back of your head, like, they're not motorsports media, so the questions they're going to ask are going to be, like, is it fun to be here, kind of thing. So so you've always got to think, okay, that's not, someone that's traveling around the world with us asking about motorsports all the time. It's that kind of, yeah, so there's differences more like that than as opposed to like differences in culture. And I think if you develop the relationships with those kind of journalists, like, there's always going to be interaction and give and take, because it's just being professional, because yeah, they're at every race, you know what I mean? So that's why we like to do things like, we'll have a dinner for them, or things like that, because at the end of the day, you spend a heck of a lot of time with these people, and it's just nice to have those kind of personal relationships. And of course, if you disagree about something that's written, that's part of the job, right? But it's so important to have those kind of relationships on a personal level. um
it has been absolutely fascinating talking to you. I think, just in summary, if you were to give, I think you've touched on a couple already, but if you were to give some tips to people who are starting in the industry, or in the industry, or are interested in learning from your communications journey that you've had to get to your role, any tips that you would particularly highlight?
yeah, I guess, like, motorsport, if you're interested in motorsports, just understanding that motorsports is not just drivers. It's everything from comms to catering to PR to engineering to mechanics. Like, it's a massive industry, and I think that the comm side of it is growing, very, very, very quickly, as the sports goes. And there's so many different categories and series, and if you're join your national ASN, your sporting club, volunteer, get down to the track, and there'll be lots of opportunities where, whether it's a smaller team, if could I help you with the social media? Like, could I help you do a little bit like that? That's how a lot of people start their journey on the comm side of things, by being around and that kind of networking and being proactive. It's definitely, and it's, yeah, so just think about it as broadly as you can. um I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking it has to be at these very, very senior levels, or drivers themselves. That's only one tiny bit of a massive industry.
That, honestly, we could talk about it to you for hours. It's been absolutely fascinating having a little look inside the world of Aston Martin Formula One. And thank you so much for sharing some of your career highlights with us, and some pro tips from one of the best. Thank you, everybody, for listening and for joining us. Thank you again to Luke for joining us from sunny Monaco. And thank you for everybody for joining us for Secrets of Our Success.
That's great. Thanks, everyone.